Hello everyone, welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Today we are here with the third session on science and technology. In the first two sessions, we have seen some of the key areas from the world of science and especially the current affairs of last 1 year with regards to science and technology. And here in this third session, we are going to continue with the same. And there are three important areas again that we have here for you. One, from the world of energy, all the things, all the developments that we have seen in the energy sector, that's one. Second, from the world of defense, all the new important areas and every test etc. that has happened in the last 1 year or so, we have a discussion on that as well. And then we'll also cover some of the key diseases that have been in the news in last 1 year. So these are three important areas from where the questions have been taken in today's session. The number of questions in today's session will be a little high. In the last two sessions, we saw almost 18-19 questions. In this session, in today's session, we are going to have almost 30 questions that we'll discuss from all these areas. So let's begin with the session without any further delay. The first area that we are going to discuss is from the world of energy. So the first question, this is the first question in front of you. With respect to the National Green Hydrogen Mission, consider the following statements. 1. SITE program under the National Green Hydrogen Mission funds the domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers and production of green hydrogen. Second, this mission will aim to substitute green hydrogen for fossil fuels in steel and shipping industries. Alright, so these are the two statements. We are launching the poll for you. Please mark your answers and then we shall have a discussion on this topic. Alright, so as we see, many of you have already marked your answers. So let's begin with the discussion. So first and foremost, we are talking about the National Green Hydrogen Mission here. And just remember that this year, this mission is going to be very crucial, very important. Because in the last 1 year, we have seen that there has been a lot of discussion around green hydrogen. Not only last 1 year rather, but I would say last couple of years, we have seen a lot of discussion around hydrogen and especially around green hydrogen. So that's why there is a green hydrogen mission also that the government of India has taken now, and there are a lot of new areas and there are a lot of new agendas that have been put as a part of this mission so that we can start manufacturing of green hydrogen in India. Alright, so looking at the options that we have, so first and foremost, let's try to understand what exactly is this entire program about. So when you look at the outcomes or the targets that we have, if you look at these targets, first and foremost, we are looking at least 5 million metric tons per annum production of hydrogen in by the year 2030. And then after that, we are also talking about a total of 125 gigawatt of capacity addition in the renewable energy segment also. So that's also a very important part of our entire discussion. Then a total of 8 lakh crores in investments is what we are targeting. A total of more than 6 lakh jobs are supposed to be created here. And then after that, a total reduction in fossil fuel imports by rupees 1 lakh crore is what we are discussing. And abatement of nearly 50 million metric million tons of annual greenhouse gas emission. So that's why these are some of the key outcomes that we have. And when it comes to the mission components, there are 4 major mission components that we have, which we have been targeting for this year as a part of this mission. First, there is this mission called as SITE. Alright, the first one is SITE, and as a part of SITE mission or sub component of this mission, there are 2 things that we are targeting. One, domestic production of electrolyzers, and second, increasing the production of green hydrogen in India. So this has been given the name as SITE. All right. So that's why SITE becomes very, very crucial from this perspective. Then the second part or second component of this of this mission is more about research and development, that we want to take up more research and development in the field. We want to add new areas to the field, and we need to understand how exactly all these things might help in increasing the total productivity in terms of hydrogen that we have in India. Then after that, the third thing that we also look at are some of the key pilot projects that will be taken. So there are these pilot projects that will also be taken as a part of this National Green Hydrogen Mission. And then finally, skill development is another factor that has been added here. So these are four major aspects, these are four major sub-components of the National Green Hydrogen Mission that the Government of India has taken. And as a part of this mission, we'll see that there will be a lot of new areas that we'll be trying to target, so that we can increase the total production of green hydrogen in the country. So let's go back and look at the options that we have. First is SITE program under National Green Hydrogen Mission funds the domestic manufacturing of electrolyzers and production of green hydrogen. And this is perfectly correct. This is what we are looking at. Now, when we talk about electrolyzers here, electrolyzers basically will help in the electrolysis of water. All right, they will help in electrolysis. They will help in electrolysis, and hence they will be useful when it comes to conversion of water into hydrogen or production of hydrogen from water. So that's why these electrolyzers, and we want domestic manufacturing of these electrolyzers and then production of green hydrogen. So this is absolutely correct. This has been taken as a part of the SITE program, which is a sub-component of the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Then after that, the second statement is this mission will aim to substitute green hydrogen for fossil fuels in steel and shipping industries. So this is also correct. We discussed about the fact that there are multiple pilot programs that will be taken, and as one of those pilot projects or pilot programs that will be initiated, this will also be a big part of the same. So that's why this is also one of those components of the National Green Hydrogen Mission. So both the statements given here are correct. So correct answer will be C. That is both the statements given here are correct. Let's move on, and just remember that this year green hydrogen or hydrogen, anything related to hydrogen, is going to be very, very crucial for your examination. Moving on, question number 2. Which of the following statements is or are correct? First, Indian Semiconductor Mission aims to promote and facilitate the generation of indigenous intellectual property. Second, China is the leading manufacturer of semiconductors along with Japan and Pacific countries. So then you have to select the correct option here. We have launched the poll for you. Please mark the options. All right. So I think many of you have already marked your answers. So let's begin with our discussion now. So first is about Indian Semiconductor Mission, and again just remember this year semiconductors are also going to be very, very important, because now we have started taking the initiative, the Government of India has started taking the initiative that they want to increase the manufacturing of semiconductor devices, semiconductors in India. So that's why we now see that there will be multiple such projects that will be taken by the government, so that they can ensure that more and more of semiconductor manufacturing can happen in India. So that's why Semiconductor Mission aims to promote and facilitate the generation of indigenous intellectual property. This is actually correct. that this is what one of the things that we have been wanting, because when it comes to the intellectual property, especially related to any advanced technology or any new technology, we see that the intellectual property or getting the licenses or getting the rights or the licenses for these intellectual property very often are very costly. And because we are, if let's say we are late in any one of these technologies, it also means that a lot of this technology will have to be bought, a lot of these licenses will have to be bought, which is going to be very, very costly for us. And this is where India wants to move forward, India wants to move quick, so that we can start making a lot of semiconductors in India, and that's why intellectual properties can also start being generated in India. So that's why, yes, this is one of the key factors that we are looking towards, and hence statement number 1 is correct. Statement number 2, China is the leading manufacturer of semiconductors along with Japan and Pacific countries. Now when it comes to semiconductor manufacturing, the most important country will be Taiwan. Alright, Taiwan will be the first one that you need to understand, and apart from Taiwan, South Korea is another country that you have to consider. So when it comes to the leading nations, understand that when it comes to the leading nations, these two will always be counted as the leading nations before China. So that's why Taiwan and South Korea have to be counted as the leading nations and not China. So hence this statement, statement number 2, is not correct, and hence the correct answer here will be 1 only. You have to mark the correct answer here. So that's why the correct answer here is 1 only. So this is what question number 2 is about. Continuing with semiconductors itself, look at question number 3. Which of the following is a semiconductor? Zinc oxide, lemon juice, porcelain and quartz. 4 options given. Please mark your answers. All right. So let's begin with our discussion here. Question number 3. Which of the following is a semiconductor? All right. So in case of semiconductor, first is zinc oxide, second is lemon juice, then porcelain and quartz. Now porcelain and quartz, these two have to be counted as insulators. These two have to be counted as insulators, and then lemon juice has to be counted as a conductor. So that's why the correct answer here will be zinc oxide. The correct answer will be zinc oxide. So zinc oxide is something that we can consider as a semiconductor, and there are some semiconductor electronic applications for which zinc oxide can be used. So for example, let's say in making some of the LEDs, we see that zinc oxide can actually be used. So that's why the correct answer here will be zinc oxide. Now when it comes to semiconductors, understand that when it comes to semiconductors, why are we calling something as a semiconductor? So because when it comes to semiconductors, semiconductors have properties which are neither of completely conductors nor properties of completely insulators. So they lie somewhere in between, because there are certain situations, situations under which you can start, or under which they can start behaving like a conductor. So if these conditions are being met, then in that case they might start behaving like a conductor. So that's why they are called as semiconductors, because they are not conductors as naturally as the normal conductors like metals are. So but there are certain conditions under which they can start behaving like a conductor, and that's why they are called as semiconductors. So usually we see that there is silicon, there is germanium. These two are primarily seen as the most important ones. Then apart from that, there are many others also which can be counted as semiconductors. So in this case, zinc oxide is also a semiconductor, And when it comes to a semiconductor, just understand that when it comes to semiconductors, we see that there are different types of semiconductors. For example, you might have heard of two basic types of semiconductors called as the N-type semiconductor and the P-type semiconductor. So that depends on what we do is sometimes to enhance the properties, to modify the properties of semiconductors, we add some impurities. Alright, we add some impurities to these semiconductors, and when we add the impurities, when we add these impurities, this is something which is also called as doping. Alright, when we add these are also called as doping. Now, when the doping is done, just remember that whenever doping is done, doping might either add one extra electron, it might add some extra electron. So if it is adding some extra electron, then in that case it is also called as N-type semiconductor. And if, let's say, the other case could be removal of an electron, and if that's the case, that if we are looking at another removal of an electron, something which is also called as creation of holes. So if creation of holes is being done in this case, or removal of, in a manner you can say, an electron, then in that case this is where you get a P-type semiconductor. So in this manner there are different ways in which we classify what semiconductors are, but just remember one thing, that semiconductors are called as semiconductors because under certain specific conditions they can start behaving like a conductor, alright, and that's why they are called as semiconductors. So that's why correct answer here will be A. Moving on, question number 4. Which of the following can be considered as green hydrogen? First, it is produced using electrolysis of water with electricity generated by hydel power. Second, it is produced using electrolysis of water with electricity powered by nuclear energy. Third, it is produced using electrolysis of water with electricity powered by burning of fossil fuels. And D, none of the above. Alright, so some of you, as you have pointed out about Taiwan, that India considers the one China policy and considers Taiwan as a part of India, sorry, as a part of China. But still, just remember that apart from China, there was another country also mentioned, that was Japan. So still Japan also, even if you, let's say, consider China as being, or let's say Taiwan as being a part of China, even then Japan was also there in the option. So still it should not be marked as the correct option, because the first two again will then, in that case, the other country should be South Korea. Alright, so let's begin. So first and foremost, when we are talking about green hydrogen, and as I told you that hydrogen will be at the center of attention this year, should be at least at the center of attention this year. So there are different ways in which we classify hydrogen. So we call it as green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, black hydrogen, brown hydrogen, grey hydrogen. There are so many different ways in which we try to classify hydrogen. The basic classification is based on what is the source that we are using, and apart from that, apart from the source that we are using, what is the method that has been used. So source and method, these two things become very, very crucial in classifying hydrogen into different colors. So when we say green hydrogen, alright, when we say green hydrogen, we are saying that the process being used is electrolysis, and the source that we are using should be some kind of renewable energy source. Now look at the options that you have. The first option basically talks about hydel power. Correct. The first option talks about hydel power because electrolysis is given in all the three statements. So electrolysis definitely is correct, but the second part, for example, here is nuclear energy. So it cannot be nuclear energy because we are looking for something that is pollution free, something that we can consider as green, something that can be considered as perfectly renewable energy. So then in that case, nuclear energy not exactly falls into that bracket. there are things which are between polluting and non-polluting when it comes to nuclear energy. So that's why nuclear energy exactly cannot be counted as a green source, as a renewable source. There are some specific ways in which only we can consider it as renewable. Otherwise, in the normal state, in the present state that we are in, we can consider it to be non-renewable. Alright, so that's why nuclear energy should not be counted. And then after that, third one talks about burning of fossil fuel. Just remember something simple, that if anything is counting as burning of fossil fuels, using fossil fuels is something that we are trying to get away from, right? And whenever you are using fossil fuel, you perhaps will never be able to call it green, right? So green will only be used whenever you are trying to get away from fossil fuels. So even if you are confused with nuclear energy, I am still okay with it, but you can't be confused with when it comes to fossil fuel and the word green. Alright, so green word will often be used for anything that is trying to get away from fossil fuels and not exactly use fossil fuels, right? So that's why just remember this, and why it becomes very crucial for us to remember this, that if it is green, it should not be fossil fuel. Now look at this, that what are the options, that what are the different types of colors that you have. So one is green hydrogen, that is what we discussed about. Then you have black hydrogen. Black hydrogen is when the source is coal. Alright, when the source is coal, then in that case it will be called as black hydrogen. Then apart from that, you have grey hydrogen and blue hydrogen. So in case of both grey and blue hydrogen, we are using natural gas. We are using natural gas with a process called as steam reforming. And then in case of pink hydrogen, we are using nuclear energy as the source and electrolysis as the process. So that's why the statement that was given, it was actually about pink hydrogen and not green hydrogen. Then there is turquoise hydrogen, also sometimes used term. It's not a term which is very often used. Sometimes it is used, and pyrolysis as a process is being used here. And then there is yellow hydrogen. Now yellow hydrogen can be considered as a component of green hydrogen itself, because when specifically solar energy is being used, which is of course one of the renewable energy sources. So if solar energy is being used, then in that case you can also call it as yellow hydrogen, but primarily it is also green hydrogen. Then there is, there are other colors also. For example, we sometimes also talk about brown hydrogen. So brown hydrogen is where lignite possibly is used sometimes. Then in that case we can also call it as brown hydrogen. So steam reforming as a process, just remember this also when it comes to steam reforming. Steam reforming is when you are trying to derive hydrogen from hydrocarbons. Alright, this is where you are trying to get hydrogen from hydrocarbons. So mainly methane, but other hydrocarbons also if you are using, then in that case we say that it is called as steam reforming. So steam reforming is when you basically are using water or steam rather, and the reaction between steam and hydrocarbon happens, and that leads to the production of hydrogen. So then in that case it is called as steam reforming, when at high temperature somewhere around 700 degrees Celsius to up to 1000 degrees Celsius could be used, and at this high temperature you are trying to convert this, or you are rather trying to extract hydrogen out of the hydrocarbons. So that is what we do in steam reforming. So what happens is that first let's say methane, if methane is being used, when we say natural gas is actually methane, most of it is actually methane. So methane will react with water and this will create hydrogen and carbon monoxide. And then we see that this process where hydrogen and carbon monoxide has been created, this further reacts, and then we see that from here we produce more of hydrogen along with carbon dioxide. So because carbon dioxide is produced here, that's why it is grey, it is not perfectly good enough. But in the second process, when we start calling it as blue hydrogen, we call it as blue hydrogen when you are capturing that carbon dioxide that has been produced. So then in that case we say that it is blue hydrogen. So the first, let's say if we talk about the reactions that are happening. So first reaction, for example, let's say in steam reforming, is where this methane is reacting with steam. Steam is water basically, right? And this is where you are producing hydrogen gas plus carbon monoxide. So this is basically what we are doing. So, so overall you have 6 sides. So I am a big fan of doing this. So you should always have a balanced reaction. And now what happens is that the hydrogen that you have, hydrogen and carbon monoxide that you have, from here we see that more of hydrogen will be produced. All right, this carbon monoxide will react with more of water, and this is where you produce more of hydrogen along with carbon dioxide. So this is basically what we see. And this process, I mean the second step that we have here, the second step actually what it does is that it increases the efficiency. It increases the efficiency, and hence the amount of hydrogen that you are producing, it actually is better. And this is where carbon capture comes in, because when we are trying to actually not let this carbon dioxide go and be emitted into the atmosphere. So that is why this is the process of steam reforming. Remember this process because often this process will be talked about in terms of hydrogen production. Moving on, so this is what we have. So correct answer here will be A. Correct answer will be A. Moving on to the next question, that is nuclear fusion. Consider the following statements regarding nuclear fusion. It is not common in nature. It requires high temperature but low pressure. Fusion eliminates the threat of proliferation. Which of the above statements is or are incorrect? So look at the options given. Please mark your options. Any relationship between green hydrogen and green hydrogen mission? The green hydrogen mission basically is about production of green hydrogen itself. All right. So let's begin with our discussion. I see that most of you have already marked your answers. And I see that there is such a mixed response here. All right, so let's have a discussion. So first statement is about not being common in nature. So this is correct, that it is not common in nature. There are only very specific conditions under which nuclear fusion can happen. So for example, we know that at the center of a star, nuclear fusion takes place. So nuclear fusion would take place in these kind of conditions where you have very specific conditions only. So for example, let's say when you consider a star, that at the center of a star nuclear fusion is happening. So there are specific conditions. What are these specific conditions? One, that you have very high temperature. Very high temperature. Second, you have very high pressure situations also there, and then at the same time you see very strong magnetic field. Very strong magnetic field. So these are three basic conditions that are fulfilled inside a star, at the center of a star, in which these nuclear fusion reactions can occur. So now look at the second statement. It talks about high temperature but low pressure. No, not low pressure, very high pressure. So that's why second statement is wrong. First was correct. Third is fusion eliminates the threat of proliferation. This is also wrong. Alright, this is also wrong because it does not eliminate. It does not eliminate the threat. You can definitely say that it reduces. Alright, it definitely reduces. It definitely reduces the threat of proliferation, but it does not eliminate it completely. The threat of proliferation, or in a manner you can say the weaponization of nuclear energy, the threat of weaponization of nuclear energy is much more when it comes to nuclear fission, but compared to that, in case of nuclear fusion, the threat of proliferation is much lesser, but you cannot say that there is no threat. Alright, you can't say that there is no threat, you can say that threat is lessened or threat is reduced. So that's why second and third statement are incorrect. You have been asked what is incorrect. So second and the third statements, these are incorrect. So this is what this is how the nuclear fusion reactions happen. Often we see that the reaction will happen like this, that you have deuterium and tritium. These are the two isotopes of hydrogen that will react, fusion will occur, it will convert into helium while releasing a lot of energy. So this is what happens in case of nuclear fusion. So just remember that when it comes to nuclear fusion, threat of proliferation is much lesser, but you can't say that it eliminates the threat of proliferation altogether. Let's look at the next question, question number 6. Consider the following statements with respect to the raw materials of biofuel. First, it can't be produced from seaweeds. Second, biogas is created by aerobic breakdown of organic materials. Third, jatropha and sugar beet are popular biofuel crops. Which of the above statements are incorrect is what you have been asked. So start marking your answers. Proliferation meaning. Proliferation means that when you are trying to weaponize, in simple terms, just think of this like this, that when you try to weaponize your nuclear program, then in that case it is called as proliferation. Basically the technicalities of it is very different here, where we are trying to enrich the uranium beyond a certain limit. So then in that case it is called as proliferation. Alright, so let's discuss this now. So which of the following are incorrect is what you have been asked. So first is it can't be produced from seaweeds. Now why are we talking about seaweeds here? Because Government of India actually has included seaweeds as a list, in the list of all the biofuel raw material. So initially, for example, let's say when we talk about the National Biofuel Policy of 2018. So in the 2018 policy, there was no mention whatsoever of seaweeds. But then there were some changes, some amendments that were made in 2021. And as a part of those amendments that was made, one of those amendments was that seaweeds will also be considered as one of the key sources of biofuel generation in India now. So that's why saying that it can't be produced is just the opposite of what we are doing, that we have now included it in the list of raw material according to our national biofuel policy. So that's why this statement is wrong. Second, biogas is created by the aerobic breakdown. This is wrong. Aerobic means what? Aerobic means presence of oxygen, right? In the presence of oxygen. So that it does not happen in the presence of oxygen, but rather it happens in the absence of oxygen. So that's why in this case, we'll say that this is also wrong, because this is anaerobic. Alright, this is an aerobic breakdown of organic matter. So that's why this is wrong. And third is jatropha and sugar beet are popular biofuel crops. Yes, both of them can be used and both of them are used. There are although some issues with jatropha, but yet we see that jatropha also is considered as one of the key crops when it comes to especially biodiesel production. So that's why third statement is correct. You have been asked which of the statements are incorrect. So statement number 1 and 2, these are two statements which are incorrect. Right, so let's move on to question number 7. Consider the following statements regarding floating solar power plants. Installation of floating solar panels may disrupt aquatic ecosystems, affecting water quality, flora and fauna. And second, not all water bodies are suitable for floating solar installations. So these are the two statements given. Please start marking your answers. anaerobic and pyrolysis are same? Not exactly, although both are happening in the absence of oxygen, but the entire process is not exactly the same. The temperature requirements, for example, in pyrolysis is much higher as compared to any normal anaerobic process. So being anaerobic is just a part of pyrolysis as a process. Alright, so as I see, many of you have marked your answers. So let's see. So most of you have actually marked the correct answer, that both these statements are correct. So when it comes to floating solar power plants, so remember things about floating solar power plants, because now we are again putting a lot of effort towards floating power plants as well. So that's why in the coming years we'll see that it will become one of the key areas when it comes to solar energy generation in India. So first and foremost, when we say floating solar power plant, what do we mean by floating solar power plant? That you have solar power plants which are installed on bodies of water. Alright, so when they are being installed on bodies of water, so this is what happens in case of floating solar power plants, and there are multiple advantages and disadvantages that we might have here. So for example, let's say when we talk about the advantages, so one of the advantages would be the land requirement. That one of the major problems with solar energy is that there is a horizontal setup of all these solar panels that we have to do, and very often agricultural land can also be used for it. So that's why we want to avoid it. Otherwise there is too much pressure on land that we are already exerting, so we don't want to exert more pressure on the land that we have. So that's why we want to move it to water bodies. So land requirements will be less. That is one major advantage. Then apart from that, it can have a cooling effect on the water bodies. The amount of evaporation that happens from the water bodies, that can be lessened. So that's the second advantage that we have. Then apart from that, because the amount of sun rays which are reaching the bottom of the water body will be less, it also means that the algae growth will be lesser. So that's why it will help in ensuring, you can say, longevity in the quality of the water. So that becomes one of the other factors. So there are all these advantages that we have. And then of course there is this, that there is a cooling effect. Alright, there is a cooling effect that you have because of this. And what happens is that when you have a land based setup, you have to ensure that the cooling of this setup can be done well. So there will be cooling systems that will have to be installed if you have a large scale solar power plant. So that body of water, if it is installed on body of water, that can be taken care of. So that's why we see that this is something that helps. So there are all these advantages that we definitely have, but then there are some concerns also that are raised, and one of those concerns is with regards to the effect that it might have on ecosystem. The effect that it might have on the ecosystem, especially when we are talking about the aquatic ecosystem. What kind of negative impact? Just understand this, that when you are blocking the rays of the sun, it also means that there is no photosynthesis. So the advantage side of it is that it can help in reducing the algal growth. But at the same time, any other aquatic plant if you have beneath this solar panel, then in that case even they are going to get negatively impacted, right? They are going to be negatively impacted. So then in that case what happens? They can't do photosynthesis, meaning that they can't make their own food, meaning that perhaps they will not survive. And if they don't survive, you know that there is the entire food web that we have in any given ecosystem, whether it is aquatic or terrestrial ecosystem, you have an entire food web that functions there. So now in this scenario, what is happening is that these aquatic plants will not be able to make their own food, perhaps they'll not be able to survive, and even the ecosystem, and then of course the flora and fauna of this particular water body. So that's why the first statement is correct. Second, not all water bodies are suitable for floating solar installations. This is also correct, because you will have to understand the depth of the water body, whether it is a stagnant water body or a flowing water body, whether it survives for the entire year long, or does it start facing scarcity of water. Is there too much of difference in the water levels because of rainfall and other factors? So there are multiple different things that we'll have to consider when it comes to floating solar power plants. So that's why this is also correct. So both A and B, that is option number C, is correct in this particular case. right? So let's move on. Question number 8. Consider the following statements regarding electric vehicles or EV mission that we have. So EVs aim to limit global warming as agreed under the Montreal Protocol. EVs can be charged with the help of AC charging stations, not DC. So these are the two statements given in front of you. Please mark your answers. Alright, so alright, so let's begin with our discussion. There's some issue, but I think now it's all correct. Alright, so let's start with our discussion. So first and foremost, consider the following statements regarding electric vehicles. First is, it aims to limit global warming as agreed under the Montreal Protocol. Now this was not exactly a part of the Montreal Protocol, but rather as a part of the Paris Climate Summit. Alright, it was a major part of Paris Climate Summit, so that's why something is so that's why not Montreal Protocol exactly, because there is the global climate agenda as a part of the Paris Climate Summit, which becomes very crucially important in this particular scenario, and hence this statement is not correct. It's about Paris Climate Summit essentially. Then second is, it can be charged with the help of AC charging stations, not DC. Now this is also wrong. We can have both AC charging stations and DC charging stations. More importantly, when it comes to the DC charging stations, they actually help in fast charging. DC charging stations can help in fast charging, so that's why they can become very crucial from this perspective. AC charging stations normally are slower as compared to the DC charging stations, and at the same time, but there are other problems because DC charging station installations are little more expensive as compared to AC charging stations. So there are pros and cons, both the things you have, but nevertheless, whether advantage or disadvantage, they can be used. All right, so that's why EVs can be, sorry, so that's why this is also wrong, that both the statements actually are wrong here. So just remember this. Moving on, question number 9. The Indian molten salt breeder reactor is the platform to burn uranium, plutonium, protactinium, and then thorium. So these are the 4 options in front of you. Please mark your answers and let's have a discussion on it. All right, so let's start the discussion. So people have started playing DC versus Marvel here, but this DC is a different DC, whether you support DC or not. All right, so Indian molten salt breeder reactor. Now Indian molten salt breeder reactor becomes a platform to burn which of the following fuel is what we have been asked. Now when it comes to the Indian molten salt breeder reactor, just remember that as a part of India's nuclear program, and if you have read about the India's nuclear program, you might know that there are 3 stages to India's nuclear program, correct? We say that it is a 3-staged nuclear program. So when we talk about the 3-stage nuclear program that India has, there are 3 stages. The first stage talks about pressurized heavy water reactors, right? Pressurized heavy water reactors. Then after that, the second stage talks about fast breeder reactor, uses fast breeder reactors, and then the third stage of the 3-stage program will either use advanced heavy water reactors, or they might use Indian molten salt breeder reactor in the future. So when it comes to the fuel that we are using, in the first stage, the fuel that we are using is basically uranium. In the first stage, the fuel that we are using is uranium. In the second stage, we also start using plutonium. We also start using plutonium here in the second stage. So plutonium along with the spent uranium that we have, that actually becomes a part of the second stage. And then in the third stage, we are actually using thorium. The third stage is basically to use thorium. And this entire program, entire nuclear program that India has built is all about using thorium, because we have one of the highest deposits of thorium in the world. So that's why from that perspective, thorium becomes a very, very crucial fuel for us. The problem with thorium is that thorium directly can't be used, alright. It can't be used directly, as is the case with natural uranium. That uranium can be used, or the natural isotope of uranium, that is uranium-235, can directly be used when it comes to a nuclear fission reactor. But in case of thorium, it cannot be used directly. So that's why we designed these 3 stages, so that ultimately we'll start using thorium as our resource. So that is basically what we are trying to do, and hence Indian molten salt breeder reactor will be using thorium. So that's why the correct answer here in this particular case will be thorium, right? So just remember this. So that's why when it comes to thorium, thorium becomes very, very crucial, because we have a lot of deposits of thorium, that if you look at different data from around the world and different statistics that are presented, we see that statistics say that some of the reports will tell you that India has the second highest deposit of thorium in the world. Some will say 5th highest and among the top 10 and so on. I would want to believe second highest, why not? So that's why thorium is the correct answer here. So now, so you also get this answer from this perspective. Now coming on to the next question. Consider the following statements regarding fuel cells. It needs to be periodically recharged. Electricity, water and heat are the only products if hydrogen is the fuel, and their primary classification is based on the type of electrolyte that they use. So which of the above given statements are correct is what you have been asked. So please mark your answers and let's have a discussion on this as well. Alright, so as I see, most of you have marked it. So many of you have marked it. So let's begin with our discussion here now. So question number 10. So we are talking about fuel cells. Now when it comes to the fuel cells, just understand this, that in case of fuel cells, first of all, what do we mean by a fuel cell? So something like this is what you would see in case of a fuel cell. So now what you see is that there is hydrogen that is being used and there is oxygen that is being used, and towards the cathode side you have hydrogen, and anode side you have hydrogen, and towards the cathode side you have oxygen. And now what we see is that in this reaction water is being released, alright. Water is a byproduct of this reaction, heat is a byproduct, and you are producing electricity. So in a manner, in case of a fuel cell, you are generating electricity from hydrogen, wherever you get that hydrogen from, whether it is green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, whatever kind of hydrogen it is, hydrogen is being utilized here to get electricity. And now the byproducts, that's why, are clean. It is a reaction between hydrogen and oxygen, hence water is getting created, and apart from water, you will get heat and electricity out of it. So this is basically what we see. Now look at the options. So first one says it needs to be periodically recharged. Now this statement is not exactly correct. That recharging is not really a part of this. It is not a rechargeable battery that we are looking at. There is a different method that we are using where hydrogen is being used in making this fuel cell. So that's why recharging is not a property of a fuel cell. Electricity, water and heat are the only products if hydrogen is the fuel. So this is correct with regards to the fuel cell. So that's why second statement is right. Third statement, their primary classification is based on the type of electrolyte that they are using. This actually is also correct. Look at this. Look at this. So what you see here is a basic comparison between the different types of fuel cell technologies. So if you see this, the classification that is done, the classification is done on the basis of what is being used. Alright, so for example, when you have polymer electrolyte membrane, this is where you are using sulfonic acid as one of the electrolytes. Similarly, when you have an alkaline fuel cell, there is an alkali that we are using, potassium hydroxide is being used. So similarly, when phosphoric acid is being used, you have the phosphoric acid fuel cell. So in this manner, whenever we are using whatever is the electrolyte that we are using, depending on that electrolyte, we do the classification. Alright, so that's why this is also correct. This statement given here is also correct. That classification is done on the basis of, primarily on the basis of their electrolyte. So statement number 2 and 3 are correct. So correct answer here will be B. That is 2 and 3 only. Right, so let's move on. Question number 11. So the first 10 questions that we had now, the first 10 questions were related to the segment of energy. Now question number 11 onwards, we move to the next segment, and this next segment is about diseases. So the next few questions that we have here are from some of the commonly discussed diseases in the newspapers or otherwise in the current affairs. So look at the first question that we have here, question number 11. Consider the following statements regarding lumpy skin disease which was recently in the news. First, this is a vector-borne pox disease caused by Capri pox virus and is emerging threat to livestock worldwide. Second, it is zoonotic disease which spreads from animals to humans. Third, it was reported and confirmed in India in 2019 from Odisha. So these are the three statements given in front of you. Please start marking your answers. Alright, so if you have marked the answer, so let's begin with our discussion now. So we are talking about the lumpy skin disease. Now in case of lumpy skin disease, this is a disease that has affected the livestock in India, and a lot of livestock in India got affected, they got diseased, many of them also died. The death numbers were also very high. For example, the data of last year is nearing more than 1 lakh. So we see that within few months itself, we saw that the numbers were very high and the numbers touched up to 1 lakh. and some of the states were worse affected. I mean, for example, states like Rajasthan and states like Gujarat, they were very badly affected, and other states also. There were more than 15 states in India which had reported cases of the lumpy skin disease in the livestock. So a lot of cattle lost their life as well. The number goes beyond a lakh. Many of these cases in Rajasthan alone, but there are other parts of the country also where we saw that these numbers were rising, and there were a lot of deaths that were reported in the other parts of the country also. So vector-borne pox disease, this is correct, caused by Capri pox virus and is emerging threat to livestock worldwide. So yes, this is correct. So this is a threat to wildlife, threat to livestock worldwide. Then after that, the second statement, it is a zoonotic disease which spreads from animals to humans. This hasn't been reported yet. We see that this is something that affects the cattle, that affects the livestock, doesn't affect humans. So that's why it is not spreading from animals to humans. Then it was reported and confirmed from Odisha. So there were some cases in that we had seen in Odisha, and then after that it started to spread in other parts, spread to other parts of the country also. So that's why even this statement is correct. So statement number 1 and statement number 3, these are two statements which are correct. So that's why in this scenario the correct answer here will be C, that is 1 and 3 only. Moving on, question number 12. What are anti-radiation pills which were recently in the news? These are non-radioactive potassium iodide pills which help human beings to block nuclear radiation absorption from an unplanned or accidental nuclear hazard. These are both preventive and curative in nature. So these are the two statements given in front of you. Please mark your answers. Let's have a discussion on it. All right. So let's begin with our discussion now. So we are talking about anti-radiation pills. Now when it comes to anti-radiation pills can be taken for battling any kind of radiation or any kind of radiation poisoning, as it is called sometimes. So then if there is any kind of radiation poisoning, then in that case anti-radiation pills can be used, and this was effectively in the news in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, where we were also talking about a possibility of a nuclear threat or a nuclear war threat from the side of Russia especially. So that is where anti-radiation pills were in the news. Now when it comes to anti-radiation pills, they can help in acting against any kind of radiation poisoning. Now when it comes to it, so we are talking about non-radioactive potassium iodide pills which can help human beings block nuclear radiation, this is correct, from any unplanned or accidental nuclear hazard. So this is correct, this first statement is correct. Second is they are both preventive and curative in nature. So now when it comes to them being preventive and curative in nature, especially when it comes to the potassium iodide pills, then in case of potassium iodide pills, remember that they are preventive in nature. They are preventive in nature. So when we say that they are preventive in nature, what it means is that they can be used as a prevention. Alright, they can be used as a prevention, they can't be used as a cure, meaning that they cannot reverse whatever damage has happened because of radiation. They can only ensure that further damage does not happen. Alright, they can save from further damage, so that's why they have to be taken as a preventive step. They have to be taken as a preventive step, and this is what we basically see when it comes to potassium iodide specifically. So that's why it is That's why remember that when it comes to it, it is something that is that will be said to be preventive in nature. So it is not curative in nature, it is preventive in nature. Although there are exceptions here also, that for example there is something called as Prussian blue. Prussian blue is used sometimes, usually against, if there is any kind of cesium poisoning or thallium poisoning, then in that case Prussian blue could be used. So in case of Prussian blue, when they are being discussed, then in that case they are not exactly preventive in nature. The poisoning that happens because of cesium, it can also be cured. So that's why in case of when it comes to Prussian blue, we see that we can still say that it is curative in nature. But here when it comes to anti-radiation pill, Prussian blue becomes an exception. So when we are talking about statement number 2, I am not considering Prussian blue here. I am only considering potassium iodide. So if we take only potassium iodide into account, in that case we should say that this is a wrong statement. So just remember the context in which I am talking about, because Prussian blue perhaps is not that UPSC will also give in the paper, because Prussian blue hasn't been in the news for any of its effect, but potassium iodide has been. And all the discussion when it comes to anti-radiation pills, this all discussion has been in and around potassium iodide tablets or potassium iodide as an anti-radiation pill. So Prussian blue is not really something that has been discussed. But if it comes to Prussian blue, just remember that Prussian blue actually can be said to be curative in nature also. So it can actually be used against cesium. It can be used against cesium, it can be used against thallium. So it can be used against poisoning that can happen due to these kind of radioactive elements. So that's why just remember this. So there are small differences here, but considering what has been discussed, what has been in the news, it has been more about potassium iodide. Right. So statement, that's why I am considering only statement number 1 to be correct. I am not considering Prussian blue. Otherwise, then in that case, statement number 2 also could have been correct. Let's move on. Question number 13. Consider the following statements regarding recently discovered Langia virus. Langia henipa virus is an RNA virus related to Nipah virus. It is a new zoonotic virus discovered in China's 2 eastern provinces. Like Nipah, which fruit bats often carry, this also is a zoonotic disease, spreads mostly probably from small mammals, shrews. So this is what has been asked of you. These are the 3 statements. Please mark your answer first. Let's have a discussion on it. Alright. So little less talked about, little I would say unknown, but let's have a discussion on this. So first is Langia henipa virus is an RNA virus related to Nipah virus. This is correct about this. It is a zoonotic virus discovered in China's 2 eastern provinces. In most of the cases, if a new disease has been discovered, goes without saying that you can consider this as a correct statement, that it actually, most of these discoveries of viral diseases happen in China. So here also we saw that in China only the discovery of this virus also happened. Like Nipah, which fruit bats often carry, this is also a zoonotic disease, spreads most probably from small mammals that are shrews. So this is correct. So this was reported that most probably perhaps the carriers might have been shrews, and it has been transmitted from the shrews to the humans. So that's why these three statements, all the three statements given here about Langya virus is also correct. Not very important, I would say, as a topic compared to many of the other diseases, but still because of the parties involved, it can become important. Question number 14. Which of the following statements regarding monkeypox virus, regarding monkeypox disease, consider the following statements. The first case of monkeypox was confirmed in India in July 2022 and there are no vaccines against monkeypox. So these are the two statements given to you. Please mark your answers. Alright, so let's begin with our discussion. So first case of monkeypox was confirmed in India in July 2022. This is correct. That last year we saw that there was one person who had returned back from a foreign trip, returned back to Kerala, and this is where we found that this monkeypox case was confirmed. So this is correct. And then apart from that, the second statement says there are no vaccines available against monkeypox. Now this is wrong. This is wrong. Good thing about here the spread, I mean there is no good thing of course about the spread, but something good as a treatment or as a preventive step is that we do have vaccines. So when it comes to the pox viruses, alright, because against smallpox we already have had a vaccination program. So that's why pox viruses generally we know how to attack them. So that's why there are different types of, there are three basic vaccines that we have which can act against monkeypox, because monkeypox, when it comes to it, it also has its symptoms which are very similar, very close to what we have seen for smallpox. So that's why it has very similar symptoms and but milder as compared to smallpox. So saying that there are no vaccines is wrong. There are vaccines available. There are three vaccines specifically which are available against monkeypox, although the supply is not that high right now and also the requirement is not there. We have been able to contain the cases, and only if something starts becoming a kind of an epidemic is when we start thinking of a vaccine, or something which is life threatening. Even if it is not an epidemic, it can be life threatening, then also it is considered for a vaccine. But otherwise we generally, although we can make vaccines against a lot of diseases, it's not that we make the vaccines or we carry out vaccination programs against all the diseases. You'll find that vaccination programs are only being carried out against the diseases, one, either if there is no cure against it, so that's why we want to prevent it as soon as possible. Secondly, if it can be life threatening, so then vaccination programs can be carried out, and if it starts becoming an epidemic, then in that case vaccination programs. Otherwise we generally do not carry out vaccination programs against any other disease. So when it comes to the statements given here, you have been asked what is correct, so only the first statement is correct. So the correct answer here will be A, that is one only. Let's move on. Question number 15. Consider the following statements regarding H3N2. 1. It is a contagious virus that can spread through droplets similar to COVID-19. Second statement, it is a subtype of the influenza B virus. So which of the above statements is or are correct? So please mark your answers. Alright, so as I see many of you have marked the answer. Right. So let's begin the discussion here. We are talking about H3N2, which was also in the news. So when it comes to H3N2, it is a kind of influenza. So contagious virus which can spread through droplets similar to COVID-19. Correct. Alright, this is the correct statement. Second, it is a subtype of influenza B virus. This is wrong because it is a subtype of influenza A. Now remember this, that when it comes to most of the common influenza that we have, most of them or many of the diseases that you might have heard of, most of them are influenza A subtypes. Alright, most of them are influenza A subtypes. So these, when it comes to H and N, these are two different proteins. Very difficult to pronounce, but two different types of proteins. So if you want to Google, you can go and Google and try to pronounce the names of what is H and what is N. But these are two different types of proteins that we are looking at. So when it comes to all these influenza A subtypes, just remember these subtypes. That first, for example, I'm sure you have heard of H1N1. H1N1, that is something which is related to swine flu. So if you have heard of swine flu is H1N1. Also the Spanish flu, the pandemic that had happened, that was also related to H1N1. So H1N1 is there. Then after that we know now about H3N2. So H3N2 becomes another subtype. So H3N2 basically can also be called as seasonal flu. Alright, it can also be called as seasonal flu. Then after that, I am sure you have heard of H5N1. H5N1, which can be called as bird flu. So H5N1 is bird flu. Then after that you also have H7N9. You have H7N9. This also is a kind of bird flu only. So that's why this is also there. So that's why we know that there are all these which have been discussed. There was another one, H9N2, which is also uncommon, but in a manner you can say that this is also a kind of bird flu itself. So overall we have seen that all these different types of flu have been there in the news on and off. So just remember them, perhaps they can be important from that perspective. So it's a subtype of influenza A. Influenza B is pretty uncommon as compared to influenza A. So that's why they are not as much in news or as much discussed as when it comes to influenza A. So influenza A basically is nothing but common cold, you can say, or common flu or flu symptoms that we see, and they can be mild, they can be extreme. In some cases like swine flu, we see that they can become extreme. In other cases they can be mild, and they all can be treatable. So that's why statement number 2 is wrong, statement number 1 is correct. And you have been asked what is correct, so correct answer here will be 1 only. Alright, moving on. Question number 16. Consider the following statements about sickle cell anemia. 1. It is caused due to genetic mutation. 2nd, it makes hemoglobin in the red blood cells clump together, affecting the RBC's shapes. So these are the two statements. So please mark your answers. Alright, so many of you have marked your answers. Right, so let's begin with our discussion here. We are talking about sickle cell anemia. Now first and foremost, why are we calling it as sickle cell? The basic reason behind it is that we see that there is a change in the shape of the red blood cells that happens. So often what you see is that the normal red blood cells, they will be disc shaped, correct? They will be disc shaped. But when it comes to this kind of a problem, what we see is that they are sickle shaped. they have this kind of a shape, and that's why they are sickle shaped, and hence we are calling them as sickle cells. Now understand the problem. When they are disc shaped and also they are flexible, so it's very easy for them to just travel throughout the body. They'll be able to travel throughout the body easily when they are disc shaped. But when they are sickle cell shaped, then in that case it becomes very difficult for them to keep traveling in the flow that they would normally have. So that becomes a problem. Because of that, what can happen is that they can also stick to the walls and the walls of the valves. So then in that case what happens is that the movement is blocked, and hence they can cause many kind of blockages, and they can cause some symptoms because of that, and that's why sickle cell anemia can become an issue. Now overall, when it comes to sickle cell anemia, it can happen, or let's say this change in the shape that happens, it may happen because of some kind of genetic mutation. Some kind of genetic mutation might lead to something like this. So that's why we see that this becomes very difficult for the flow to happen. So it is caused due to genetic mutation. This is correct, that it happens because of genetic mutation. Second, it makes the hemoglobin in the red blood cells clump together, affecting RBC's shape. This also is correct, that both the statements given here are correct. So what we see is that there are beta globin. So when it comes to the genetic mutation, you have the beta globin cells, beta globin genes, and these are the ones which get affected, and this is where the mutation happens, and ultimately we see that it can lead to something like this, that is sickle cell anemia. So statement number 1 is also correct, statement number 2 is also correct. So correct answer here will be C, that is both 1 and 2 are correct statements. Let's move on to the next question. Consider the following statements on neglected tropical diseases. 1. Recently, a global report on neglected tropical diseases was released by WHO. 2nd, rabies, dengue, chikungunya are examples of bacterial NTDs. 3rd, India has world's largest absolute burden of at least 10 major NTDs. So these are the 3 statements given. Please mark your answers. Alright, so let's begin with our discussion. Recently, a global report on neglected tropical disease was released by WHO. This is correct, that WHO had released a list of all the neglected tropical diseases and the worldwide distribution of them, so that people start understanding, because when we say neglected tropical diseases, it means that these are diseases which are being neglected because the numbers are low and they are endemic in nature because of multiple reasons like this. We see that there are very limited things, there are limited programs that are being carried out by different countries towards this neglected tropical diseases. So that is the first thing. Second, rabies, dengue and chikungunya are examples of bacterial NTDs. See, whether they are examples of NTDs or not, you might not know or you may know, but when it comes to rabies, dengue, chikungunya, you can't call them as bacterial, right? Rabies, for example, you know that these are viral, right? They are viral in nature, they are caused by viruses, so that's why this is wrong. India has the world's largest absolute burden of at least 10 major NTDs. Yes, this is also one of the problems that India has, that some of the key diseases we have seen that India actually has a very large number or very large share of the entire number that we see in the entire worldwide distribution. So for example, in case of dengue, so dengue is one of those diseases Then apart from dengue, what we see is that even in case of Kala Azar, that's the same scenario. Then in case of some of the other diseases also, let's say even in case of filariasis, there also we see the same problem. In case of leprosy also, leprosy has been also reported highest numbers in India. So that's why in case of leprosy also this is one of the major issues. So that's why there are these diseases where we see that India has the highest burden of all these. So that's why India needs to look into all these diseases. So that's why this statement is correct. So 1 and 3, these two statements given here are correct. So if you look at these neglected tropical diseases, these are some of the common ones that we see. So rabies, dengue and chikungunya, these are examples of viral diseases. And then after that, leprosy is one major problem that India has. Yaws is one disease that India has been able to eradicate. There was a good eradication program that was launched by the government of India, and we have been able to eradicate yaws from India. Although we had the same program also against Kala Azar, but in that case of Kala Azar, we haven't been successful. So these are some of the neglected tropical diseases. Moving on, the next question related to one of these neglected tropical diseases, we are talking about Kala Azar. So Kala Azar, or also known as black fever or visceral leishmaniasis, is a type of what? Viral disease, bacterial disease, protozoan disease, or a fungal disease. So these are the 4 options in front of you. Please mark your answer. Alright, so as I see, many of you have marked the answers. So let's start with our discussion here. Right, so Kala Azar. So when we are talking about Kala Azar is, first of all, it is a protozoan disease. Now, when it comes to Kala Azar, one of the issues that we see with Kala Azar is that it has become endemic in India. It is endemic in India. And why are we calling it as endemic? Because there are few Indian states in basically the Gangetic Plains, starting from Uttar Pradesh, then Bihar, then Jharkhand, and West Bengal. So these 4 states in India, they suffer the most when it comes to Kala Azar, and that's why in a manner you can say that the entire Gangetic Plain where it starts from, this is where we see that these are the states that are getting affected the most. Now at the same time, apart from the fact that yes, they are getting affected the most, what you also need to understand is that when it comes to the protozoal diseases of the world, Kala Azar, after malaria, it becomes the second, you can say the second deadliest protozoan disease in the world. So that's why it is something that we need to understand well, and the culprit is sandfly. The culprit is sandfly, and it can happen because of bite of sandfly. So that's why we see that a lot of program against sandfly eradication also is being carried out in these kind of areas, so that we can reduce the total number of issues that we are seeing in today's world. So that is also is something that is we have to understand in case of Kala Azar. So coming back, so that's why the correct answer here will be C, that it is a protozoan disease. Moving on, question number 19. So these were the areas related to diseases. Now we move on to our next segment, the last segment. The next 11 questions are based on defense. So all the things, all the tests that have happened in the case in the field of defense, or all the new programs that have been launched in the defense sector. This is what we are going to discuss next. So let's begin with our discussion. So next 12 questions basically you have here. So first is, consider the following statements regarding LCH Prachand. It is a multi-role attack helicopter designed and developed by the National Aerospace Laboratory. LCH is the only attack helicopter in the world that can land and take off at an altitude of even 5,000 meters. So these are the two statements given. Please mark your answers. Let's have a discussion on it. Alright, so let's begin our discussion here with regards to LCH Prachand. Now LCH Prachand, when it comes to it, first of all, this is how it looks like. Now in case of LCH Prachand, first and foremost, yes, it is a multi-combat helicopter that we have. Apart from that, when it comes to it, the second statement that we saw, that it is world's only such helicopter that can fly and take off from such a high altitude, like even more than 5,000 meters. So that is very unique about this, and that's why even in places like Siachen Glacier, it can very effectively work there. So that's why it becomes very crucial from that perspective, that it is actually helpful there, that you can use it in Rajasthan if you want, you can use it in Ladakh if you want. So in both the cases, in such diverse geographies, we can make the use of LCH Prachand. Now one more thing, that it is also capable of launching missiles. So it will be able to launch missiles from air to ground, or air to surface, or air to air as well. So both the kinds of missiles also can be launched from here. So that's why from this perspective it becomes very crucial. Now coming back to the question or the statements given, it is a multi-role attack helicopter, that is correct, designed and developed by the National Aerospace Laboratories. This is wrong. It has been done by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, that is HAL. So that's why the first statement is not correct. Second is, it is the only attack helicopter in the world that can land and take off at an altitude of even 5,000 meters. This is correct, that it can take off, and there is no other that can match LCH Prachand as of today. So that's why correct statement is 2 only. Moving on, question number 20. Consider the following statements with respect to advanced towed artillery gun system. The ATAGS is an indigenous howitzer gun developed by the DRDO. Second, howitzers are an umbrella term for a category of short range artillery guns. So these are the two statements. Please mark your answers. Alright, so let's move forward. So first statement is, it is an indigenously developed howitzer gun developed by the DRDO. This is correct, that we are talking about an advanced towed artillery gun system that we have, and this is how it looks like. And when it comes to it, it becomes very crucial, because this is a long range gun. So when it comes to howitzers, just remember that howitzer is a category where we are talking about long range guns. And not only the fact that fine it is long range gun, at the same time there are advanced features also that have been added to it, and because of these features it will become very effective in a combat situation. So for example, what we know is that it can operate in a self-propelled mode, for example, so makes it very versatile to be used. And then after that, the number of rounds that it can fire is also greater. It can fire up to 6 rounds, I believe. So we see that there are all these features that we have, because of which it becomes a much better artillery system that we have compared to the other generations that we have had until now. So it is an indigenous howitzer gun developed by the DRDO. This is correct. And the second statement is, howitzer is an umbrella term for category of short range artillery guns. No, this is basically for the long range artillery guns. So that's why second statement is not correct, only the first statement is correct. So correct answer here will be A, that is 1 only. Moving on, question number 11. Question number 21. Consider the following statements regarding Indian Army's future infantry soldier as a system. The FINSAS project aims at modernizing infantry and enhancing the operational capability of the soldier by equipping them with modern systems. Has 3 subsystems. The first is modern state-of-the-art assault rifle along with day and night holographic and reflex sights. Second subsystem is the protection system with a helmet and bulletproof jacket. And the third subsystem consists of a communication and surveillance system incorporating real-time data connectivity. So these are your statements. So let's begin our discussion here. So when we are talking about this FINSAS, first and foremost, most of you have actually marked the correct answer, and the complexity of the statement sometimes tell you the answer itself. So when we are talking about FINSAS, we are talking about a future where we would be able to give all these things to our soldiers, and will be able to equip them with all the modern weapons, and not only weapons but also defense systems. So for example, they would have different types of weapons. There are different kinds of guns that can be used along with this entire system. Apart from that, there can be systems that will also help them to save themselves, protect themselves. There will be clothing, for example, which will be much advanced, bulletproof clothing, at the same time very lightweight clothing. Then also we see that there are other equipments given for surveillance, for communication, for tracking. For all these purposes, we see that there are multiple different systems that they will be equipped with. So this is what FINSAS is basically trying to do. So overall, all these systems, all these subsystems that we have mentioned here, they are actually equipped with all these subsystems. So that's why all these given 4 statements, they are correct. All these subsystems and all these statements about these subsystems is correct. Moving on, question number 22. Consider the following statements regarding Agni 5. It is a surface to air ballistic missile system. It can strike a target up to 5,000 kilometers. It uses a 3-stage solid fuel engine. So these are the 3 statements. Please mark your answers. It's an easier question, so I am expecting that again I'll get all the correct answers. Alright. So I hope you have marked your answer. Yeah, all those PUBG comments, but I understand where you're coming from. Anyway, so let's talk about Agni 5. So in case of Agni 5, first statement says it is a surface to air ballistic missile system. Now coming to Agni 5 or any Agni missile that we are discussing, Agni missiles are basically surface to surface missiles. Alright, they are surface to surface ballistic missiles and their ranges are different. So Agni 1 has a lower range, Agni 2 had a better range, Agni 4 has a much better range, and Agni 5 has a better range than that. And that's why as per the official information, it will have or it has a range of up to 5,000 kilometers or beyond. So in case of Agni 5, it can have a target, it can hit a target of up to 5,000 kilometers. Although if you believe China and if you believe the Chinese reports, China has claimed that Agni 5 does not have a range of 5,000 kilometers, but it has a range of up to 8,000 kilometers, just that India is withholding the information according to China. That India is withholding the information. They don't want to say that Agni 5 has a range of up to 8,000 kilometers, because if they say it out loud, then there will be some international controversies that will be created and India will have to fight all these controversies. So that's why India is not telling the truth and India is actually hiding the truth according to China. But according to the official reports released by India, it has a target, it can hit a target of up to 5,000 kilometers. So this is the range of Agni 5 missiles. So first is surface to air is wrong, it is a surface to surface missile. So that's why first statement is not correct, it is surface to surface ballistic missile. Second, it can strike a target of up to 5,000 kilometers, it is correct. So second statement is correct. Third statement, it uses a 3-stage solid fueled engine. So this is also correct. So when we talk about 3 stages, understand that when we say stages, we basically mean the components or compartments rather, that there are 3 different compartments in which fuel has been kept, a solid fuel has been kept. Now why solid fuel also? Solid fuel always has much better thrust, alright. It provides higher thrust as compared to the other fuels. So that's why solid fuels will be used in these kind of engines. So 3 stages, because if let's say it was 1 stage or 2 stages, then the range might not have been that great. So to increase that range, you need more fuel. To travel longer distances, you need more fuel, and that's why there are 3 compartments and hence 3 stages. So that's why statement number 2 and 3 are correct. So correct answer here will be B, that is 2 and 3. Moving on, question number 23. Consider the following statements regarding BrahMos. BrahMos is a supersonic surface-to-surface ballistic missile. It can be launched from a submarine, ship, air and land. The extended range version of BrahMos air launch missile is around 290 kilometers. So these are the 3 statements in front of you. Again in this scenario also, we know that I would say that it's also an easy question. I need good number of correct answers, please. Alright, so let's begin our discussion here. Question number 23. So first is BrahMos is a supersonic surface-to-surface ballistic missile. First of all, it is not a ballistic missile. The most important factor about this BrahMos is that it's a cruise missile and it's a supersonic cruise missile. Now understand this, that why it is so unique, that being a cruise missile, normally what you'll see is that if it's a cruise missile, normally it will be a subsonic missile. What do we mean by subsonic? That the speed with which the missile can travel is lesser than the speed of sound. But here in this case, in case of BrahMos, what we are saying is that it's a supersonic cruise missile. So it's not a supersonic ballistic missile, it's a supersonic cruise missile. So that's why the first statement is wrong. And not only it's a supersonic cruise missile, but among the fastest. Right now, the fastest cruise missile in the world. Then can be launched from a submarine, ship, air and land. Also correct, that we can actually launch it from all these different platforms. So all these platforms can be used. So that's correct. The extended range version of BrahMos air launch missile is around 290 kilometers. Even this is wrong. Alright, this is also wrong. This is up to 450 kilometers. Alright, the extended range version is up to 450 kilometers. So this is where there is a difference between the first version of BrahMos and the second version of BrahMos. The first version of BrahMos is where we saw that BrahMos was allowed to have a range up to 290 kilometers only. The speed was also less, up to 2.8 Mach I believe. And then in the second version of BrahMos, the extended range version of BrahMos, now we have a capacity of going up to 450 kilometers. So this happened because earlier India was not allowed, and now India has been allowed, being a part of MTCR. So that's why this is not 450 kilometers, it is not 290 kilometers, it is up to 450 kilometers. So that's why statement number 1 is wrong and statement number 3 is also wrong. So that's why correct answer here will be, you have been asked what is not correct. So that's why correct answer here will be 1 and 3. So 1 and 3, both the statements are wrong. So when it comes to BrahMos, this is BrahMos 1 missile, and now we are also moving towards BrahMos 2, which will very often, very soon will also be available for Indian defense. But let's see how soon. Now moving on. Which among the following is not an anti-tank missile? Nag, Amog, Helena and Trishul. Alright, so let's begin our discussion here. Which among the following is not an anti-tank missile? So anti-tank missiles are the missiles that we will use against tanks during a battle, during a warfare. We'll see that anti-tank missiles can be used. So Nag definitely is an anti-tank missile. It is the primary anti-tank missile that India has. Helena is basically a type of Nag. So that's why Helena can also not be an option. Amog is also an anti-tank missile. Trishul is not. Trishul is not. Trishul is a very short range surface to air missile. As a part of India's integrated guided missile development program, there were 5 families of missiles. You might know that there were 5 families of missiles that we had started: Agni, Prithvi, Trishul, Akash and Nag, out of which Nag is the anti-tank missile, Trishul is not. So that's why the correct answer here will be Trishul. Moving on, question number 25. Consider the following statements regarding vertical launch short range surface to air missile. It is a shipborne weapon system meant for neutralizing various aerial threats at close range, including sea skimming targets. Second, was built by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. All right. So let's begin with our discussion here. So we are talking about vertical launch SR SAM. So first is, it is a shipborne weapon system meant for neutralizing various aerial threats at close range, including the sea skimming targets. So this is correct, that this is something that can be done. Second is that it was built by Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Normally we will see that when it comes to missiles, missiles will be made by DRDO. The missiles that are being developed in India, they will be developed by DRDO, not Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. Hindustan Aeronautics Limited will be more concerned with making the aircrafts, whether fighter aircrafts or helicopters, etc. Most of the times they will be made there. But when it comes to missile construction, missile development, they often happen at DRDO. So that's why second statement is not correct. The first statement is correct. So the correct answer here will be 1 only. Let's move on. Question number 26. Consider the following features of quick reaction surface to air missile. It has a single stage rocket motor propulsion. The firing range of the missile is 5 to 30 kilometers with a 6 kilometers altitude. So these are the two statements. Please mark your answers first. Alright, so let's begin with our discussion here. So quick reaction surface to air missile system. So first and foremost, when it comes to quick reaction system, what we see is that these are systems which have a shorter range and they are basically a single stage rocket motor propulsion. So single stage, that's why I told you that whenever you have less range to cover, in that case only one compartment of fuel will be enough. So more or less, whenever it comes to any short scale or any short range missile, you will find that they are single stage missiles. So this is also correct when it comes to the quick reaction surface to air missiles. And there were different tests that were conducted last year, and we saw that all these tests were successful. The firing range of the missile is from 5 to 30 kilometers, this is correct, with an altitude of up to 6 kilometers. So this is a fact about this missile which is also correct. So both the statements given here are correct. Now when it comes to many of these missile systems that we are discussing, in many of these cases, just remember that facts related to these missiles or facts related to these aircrafts can be asked in the paper. If you look at the past papers also, whenever the question has come from defense, they very often have asked many of these facts related to the defense. So that's why they can be asked. Alright, so look at the next question. Consider the following regarding IAC Vikrant, or now INS Vikrant also you can say that. It is considered to be India's first indigenously built warship with around 76% indigenous content. It is designed by Indian Navy's in-house warship design bureau and built by Cochin Shipyard Limited, a public sector shipyard under Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Waterways. And then the ship has been named after the first carrier Vikrant that was procured from Russia. Alright, so let's begin with our discussion here. So when we are talking about IAC, IAC means indigenous aircraft carrier, and when it gets inducted into the Navy it becomes INS. So IAC will become INS. So when we say INS Vikrant, what we are basically looking at is that this is basically a warship, an indigenously made warship of India, and the statements that have been given to you with regards to INS or IAC Vikrant, just remember that the first statement, when it, let's go back to the first statement, considered to be India's first indigenously built warship. This is correct with almost 76% indigenous target, indigenous content. I mean, I'm sure that UPSC will never give you these kind of numbers, but because we are revising also, we should know some of these facts. Designed by Indian Navy's in-house warship design bureau, correct. Built by Cochin Shipyard Limited, that's also correct. So that's why statement number 2 is also correct. The ship is named after the first carrier Vikrant, which was procured from Russia. Now, it was not procured from Russia. If you know about Vikrant, although retired back in I think 1997 itself, it was procured from the UK. And when it comes to procurement from Russia, it was Vikramaditya, INS Vikramaditya. This was procured from Russia, alright. So not Vikrant. So Vikrant was procured from the UK. So that's why the third statement is not correct. So correct answer here will be A. That is only the first and the second statements. These are the only two statements which are correct. The third one is not. Let's move on. Question number 28. An anti-satellite weapon or ASAT is anything that destroys or physically damages a satellite. Consider the following statements regarding the Indian ASAT test. Mission Kranti was country's first ever anti-satellite missile test, successfully conducted in March 2019. The test made India 5th country after United States, Russia, China and France to have tested ASAT weapons. And the target of the test was a satellite present in a low Earth orbit which was hit by a kinetic kill vehicle. So these are the three statements given. Please mark your answers. Right, so let's start with our discussion. So the first statement, so when we are talking about the anti-satellite weapon or anti-satellite missile, what we are basically looking at is a missile that can also target satellites, right? They can also target satellites, and that's why in case of anti-satellite missile, you can say in a manner they are modified interceptor missile from the Indian ballistic missile development system. So they would be able to target satellites. Now targeting satellites in the low Earth orbit is a very huge achievement to have, a huge feat for India, and this is something that we have been able to do. Now this mission, when it comes to the mission was named as Mission Shakti and it was not Mission Kranti. So that's why this is wrong. It was Mission Shakti. This is Mission Shakti, alright. And then after that, the second is made India the 5th country, alright, made India the 5th country. So now in this case, India did not become the 5th country because France is not here. France has not yet done that test. US has the system, Russia has such a system and China has such a system. India became the 4th country. India became the 4th such country to have such a weapon system. So that's why no France, so that's why this is also wrong. The target of the test was a satellite present in the low Earth orbit which was hit by a kinetic kill vehicle. Now this is correct, that what we did was that we launched a satellite, and this satellite was a microsat satellite. It is said to be a microsat satellite. So when we launched the microsat satellite, we said that okay fine, we are launching this satellite, it will have all these capacities and everything, and then 2 months later we destroyed that satellite. So so then it was realized that microsat satellite was not really supposed to be a satellite for any kind of function, but rather it was supposed to be for a test for our anti-satellite missile. So that's why, oh sorry, it was supposed to be which of the following given statements is or are not correct. So already all of you have marked your answers. I'm sorry for this. So it was supposed to be not correct, and from the perspective of not correct, the first and the second statements are actually not correct. So answer here should be A. I apologize for this, very sorry for this, but I missed this not. So there should have been not correct or incorrect is what we wanted to ask. So that's why first and the second statements, remember this. And again, anti-satellite missiles will be crucial because for India it has been a huge development. Moving on, question number 29. Consider the following regarding AD-1 missile. The AD-1 is a long-range interceptor missile designed for both low exo-atmospheric and endo-atmospheric interceptor of long-range ballistic missiles as well as aircrafts. Second, it is propelled by a two-stage solid motor and equipped with an indigenously developed advanced control system, navigation and guidance algorithm to precisely guide the vehicle to the target. So these are the two statements given. Please mark your answers. Let's have a discussion on it. Alright, so let's move forward with our discussion here. So we are talking about AD-1 missile. Now when it comes to AD-1, you have to understand that we are talking about missiles which can act as interceptors, which can intercept any incoming ballistic missile or any incoming aircraft, and this is what we are launching these missiles for. So first and foremost, first we started with AAD and PAD. This was Advanced Air Defense and Prithvi Air Defense. So both of these, Advanced Air Defense and Prithvi Air Defense, in these two cases what we see is that these this is supposed to be used for endo-atmospheric range, and this is supposed to be used for exo-atmospheric range. Now here what we see is that their targets are up to 2000 kilometers. Alright, their targets are up to 2000 kilometers, and in the next phase now the development that we are looking at is of AD-1 and AD-2, and in this case AD-1 and AD-2 we would be trying to target up to 5000 kilometers range. Alright, AD-1 and AD-2 will try to target up to 5000 kilometers range, and they will also intercept all the incoming ballistic missiles and the incoming aircrafts. Alright, this is what the target is supposed to be. So let's go back and discuss this. Long range interceptor, yes, it is a long range interceptor up to 5000 kilometers, designed for both low exo-atmospheric and also endo-atmospheric of long range ballistic missile as well as aircraft. So that's why this is correct. And the second statement also given here, all these advanced systems, they all will be a part of the AD-1 system or the AD-1 missile. So that's why both these statements given here, both of these statements are correct. Moving on, the last question of the day. Consider the following about Rudram. Rudram is a series of air to surface ground attack and anti-radiation missiles. The operational range of Rudram 1 is 100 kilometers, Rudram 2 is 200 and Rudram 3 is 400, and it can be used for destroying enemy surveillance radars, communication stations and bunkers. So please mark your answer. Let's discuss this. Quickly please mark your answers. Alright. So we are talking about Rudram. Now what is Rudram? Rudram, first of all, remember that Rudram is a class of anti-radiation missiles. Alright, we are saying that these are anti-radiation missiles. Now when we say something is anti-radiation, understand the meaning of radiation, or what do we mean by anti-radiation here? That we are trying to catch any radiation or any electromagnetic wave. Most importantly, most of the times we are trying to catch the radio waves, or sometimes also microwaves. Most of the times radio waves or sometimes also microwaves is what we are trying to catch. Now that's why anti-radiation, because radiations are to be supposed to be caught, and when we are able to catch those radiations, we can also lodge an attack against these radiations. So this is what Rudram is supposed to do, and that's why the name is also Rudram, because when we do the Rudram chant, this is basically done to protect you from any problem or any kind of problem. So this is what it is supposed to do, that it is supposed to protect us against the problems. What kind of problems? The enemy radars that can very easily catch any one of our aircrafts, or any missiles etc. could be caught. So first what you will do is you will destroy those radars, and for destroying those radars we need the anti-radiation missiles. So hence we are using this anti-radiation missile and has been named as Rudram. So series of air to surface, ground attack and anti-radiation missiles, this is correct. Then the operational range, when we are talking about the operational range is 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers and 400 kilometers. This is not correct. Alright. So the first one, for example, Rudram 1 is 150 kilometers. Rudram 2 is up to 300 kilometers. And Rudram 3 can go up to 550 kilometers. So that's why this is wrong. Now why a range based question? Because UPSC has done this in the past. When they asked a question about Agni 4 in 2014, they had asked the range also. So it's not that it is so factual that they will not ask it. Remember that when it comes to defense, I'm saying this again, I said it in another question also, that when it comes to defense, UPSC has been asking questions which are factual. So that's why some of the key factors, some of the key let's say the characteristics or some key information about all these things, they can remain important for your exam. Alright. Third, used for destroying enemy surveillance radars, communication stations and bunkers. So any kind of radiation, right? Most of the times radiations can be caught. So that's why the correct answer here will be C, that is 1 and 3 only. So both these statements are correct, 1 and 3. So this is it. So this brings us to the end of our sessions for science and technology. I hope that the last 3 sessions that we discussed, I hope you enjoyed it, and not only that, I also hope that questions come directly from whatever we discussed here. So these are some of the most important areas according to my analysis, I would say. But yes, I cannot say that these are the only topics which are important. If you can, please revise other topics also, especially if you are a candidate for this year's prelims examination. With that, I wish you all the very best for the examination. I hope that all of you succeed in the exam and come out with flying colors and go on to write the mains examination. So with that, best of luck. Please go back, as I say again, revise everything that we discussed, go well and sleep well. Good night.